in. So as you can see from the outline, we've got a lot of stuff to cover tonight. I'm just going to dive right in from the top down. I'll go over the capstone check-in that's due on Monday in a minute. We're going to brainstorm and create an ERD for a library together. We're then going to go over a full stack diagram for context of, hey, what are we building? How do the frameworks work? All of that good stuff. We are going to go into the project from yesterday, and we can either do two different things. I can either do a review of the front end stuff of how do we make the API call, how do we get the data to show up, how do we link between the pages, or if you guys want, I can do the whole project where you guys just watch along, and then when you have questions or need a concept recovered, you can just interrupt me, and I will do like a little tangent on that topic. So I'm going to open that up to a poll. Then we are going to go over some basic interview questions that you should be prepared for in any interview. Then we are moving into an ES6 review. These are all different JavaScript concepts that are all newer to the programming language. And because of that, interviewers love to test on that. So we are going to kind of do a random name drawing to have everyone work on those concepts and get a little practice with them. We are then going to move on to some topics that we may have briefly covered, but we need to prepare you kind of from an interview level on. So that's going to be REST, which is representative state transfer, and some of the alternatives or things in a similar space like GraphQL, sockets, and AJAX. We've got to go over MVC, which is Model View Controller. You've been writing your code in Model View Controller without you even realizing that you have been. We are going to go over SQL versus Mongo databases. And then we're going to finish up with what a whiteboard interview is. And we'll probably have more prep for you on that when I get back, not next week, but the following week. Before we dive into any of that, does anyone have questions? Ariel is our TA tonight. She is running behind. She had a doctor's appointment late that she couldn't get out of. So she will be here, I think, around 6 o'clock. Okay. I sent a note in the CIC Student C3 channel after class last night. Starting on Monday, it will be a requirement to have cameras on if you would like to get credit for attendance. It is very, very hard to teach without having visual feedback from you guys, knowing when things are sinking in, when things aren't sinking in. So if there are any problems with you having your camera on, feel free to shoot me a message or Jesse or Jason, and we'll figure it out. We definitely can have exceptions to the policy, but starting on Monday for Nathan's sake, and then my sake when I get back the following week, cameras on really makes it much easier to teach, to see what concepts are sinking in and which ones aren't. I think we've realized there are a couple students that are further behind than we would have hoped. And we want to fix that, right? And so one way of doing that is making sure that we've got feedback. I'm not sure if any of you guys have taught, but it is totally different when you teach to either a room or when you teach to over video, and you can see the students' faces and their reactions and realize, oh, maybe I taught something that didn't quite sink in, or I need to go recover that topic. But without seeing your faces, it's really hard to gauge that. So that's why we are going to go for a video on policy starting on Monday. With all of that said, tonight is my last class. You have a whole week off from me until I come back the following Monday. Nathan is going to come in and teach you all about DevOps and a little bit more practice on Git. He's going to help get your projects up on GitHub. He's going to do a lot of great stuff, including full stack project deploys with the database and all of that stuff. So with all of that said, instead of having a live capstone check-in on Monday, I have a Canvas assignment posted. What I am asking for you guys to do is two different parts. One, you're going to upload both your front end and your back end as a zip file. However, before you make the zip, delete out the node modules folder. The node modules folder is like 200 or 300 meg. And when we multiply that by the number of students in the class, those files just get huge and unwieldy. So you're going to delete your node modules from both your front end and your back end folders. You are then going to create a zip file. You can either create two separate ones for the front end and the back end or one big one. It doesn't really matter. You're going to upload both of them, and then you are going to fill out your stand-up, which is what did you do from since your last stand-up or your last check-in? What are you working on next? And what are your roadblocks or concerns? This is due Monday at 5:30. So right before class, this is due. I will be giving you feedback on each one of your assignments directly in Canvas, as well as a 1, 2, or 3 score. Below expectations, meeting expectations, or exceeding expectations. If you are exceeding expectations, obviously you're good. You don't have anything to worry about. If you are meeting expectations, also similar boat, keep up the good work. You're on the right track. You're only going to be below expectations if you have no backend set up or if you don't have a clear idea of what your next steps are. So that is kind of where we're checking in. Again, this is due on Monday. You have all weekend to work on it. And by no means do I want you to stop working on your capstone after you submit this, but this is just an easy way to get all of your assignments in and have me give you feedback on them asynchronously. So if you would like to submit this before Monday, by all means, you are welcome to. But this is just a check-in for us to see where you are at. It's going to be basically the same exact thing that we did last Monday and the Mondays before that, except now we're going to move to this asynchronous format so I can get you feedback while Nathan is teaching next week. Any questions on the Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, on that, for the back end, are we supposed to, or is there even a way to include the database?
There isn't, but just by me being able to look at your model files, that should be enough. I don't necessarily need to run your backend, at which point we would have to worry about how do we get the database and copy it and all of that stuff. But I'm going to be doing more of a code level review on it. Which is great because that's what I do at work all day for the rest of my team is review their code. Of course, when I do a code review for them, I also pull their code and run it and make sure everything's working. For you guys, we're just going to do that code level review, and I'll get you some feedback based off of your code itself.
Sounds good. Thank you.
That's a great question, though.
Do we have an office hour Sunday?
Office hours. Yes. Sorry, I'm flying on Saturday, so I had to do a time zone conversion in my head. Let's shoot for office hours at 5 o'clock Eastern on Sunday. And keep your eyes on the Slack channel in case I need to slide that time one way or another. But most likely it will be Sunday at 5. Unless, hold on, I'm going to do a quick poll.
Okay.
All right, poll is up for office hours. 9 votes in, giving everyone a chance to vote.
What's leading?
Sunday at 5. 10 votes in. Anyone else? All right. Good old faithful. Looks like it is staying where it always has. Okay, so office hours Sunday at 5 p.m. Any questions about the capstone check-in due Monday by 5:30? Please remember to delete your node modules folder before you create the zip. Go ahead, Nicole. Sorry.
So for that, what should we have like fully? Should we have our first page? Should we just, what should that be like?
You should have a page. You should have at least one model in your database, and you should have one endpoint that is talking from the front end to the back end.
Got it. Thank you.
Now, that could be a login endpoint with a user's model. That's completely fine. If you want to model your authentication off the blog project, that's fine. If you are using a third-party API, if you're using someone else's API instead of your own, I would accept that. I would accept that instead of having your own API endpoint and model set up. So if you're using another API and you've got that data showing up on your site, that is a good alternative, right? It's important to keep in mind here that everyone's capstones are going to be a little different. So I hate to set like a strict requirement, but we basically want something full stacky going on at this point, whether that's your own API, whether that's someone else's API, whether that's your database or something else. We just want to have that basic structure done at this point.
I have another question.
Go for it.
So I noticed we have to do the presentation, and then so I was thinking like styling. I feel like that's a little bit harder in React. But if I just had everything that I needed showing up on my website, would that be fine if I didn't do any styling at this moment?
Yep. Yeah. So important to remember, capstone is more, the presentation is more about talking about your journey over the last 6 months than it is about the capstone itself. So whenever you are building an app, you think, oh, I always want to show off the final product, right? I want to show off like why people would use this. And while that is partially important, what's more important is that your friends and family are going to be at graduation. They're not going to have any technical expertise. So what they want to know is, what have you been doing in the past 6 months? You disappeared into this tiny black hole of class. What did you get out of this, right? And so that's what the presentation should be about, is everything that you learned over the 6 months. And, oh, hey, because I learned all of that, look at this cool thing that I made. I will say that, and Christy reminded me that this is something that I need to do before graduation, is I will give a brief like 5-minute presentation on stage as to what React is, what a front end is, what a back end is, what a database is, because all of you guys are using the similar stack, if not the exact same stack, right? So we're going to have a lot of people in the audience who are like, what is Node? I've never heard of Node before, right? And so I will give a brief overview, kind of a technical overview for non-technical people, so they have an idea of what you're building and what, kind of what those terms are, so you don't have to do a vocab lesson at graduation. Any questions about that? Or any in general? I'm going to do a brief overview of how you would submit this assignment. So let me share my screen again. For practice, I'm going to say, hey, on my desktop in my code, week 20, let's say day 3 code, I've got my front end and my back end here. So I'm going to go to my front end and I'm just going to delete the node modules folder. I'm going to go to my back end and I'm going to delete my node modules folder. I'm then going to go up to the day 3 level because this day 3 has both my front end and back end folders in it. I'm going to right click and I'm going to hit compress. This .zip file is the only thing that Canvas will let you upload. It has to be compressed into a zip. And please, 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 for the sake of my internet, delete out the node modules folder in both the front end and the back end before you make the zip right here. Then over in Canvas, you're going to start assignment like always. You're going to choose the file. You're going to say D3. You're going to hit open. And once it's there, you're going to switch over to the text entry and you're going to type out the answers to these 3 questions. You're going to say, what did you do since your last stand-up? What are you working on next? And where are your roadblocks? I'm actually hoping that it will let you do both of them because I'm not sure if it will. So I'm going to say like, got full stack data working, and then working on adding images next, and then need to review linking with IDs. And hopefully when I hit submit assignment, I will check that after class and make sure it had both of them.
And if it doesn't let you do both, you can just add a comment to your upload.
Yes, that's actually probably a better way of doing it. I'm going to modify the assignment right now so it does that.
When you say do both, what do you mean by do both? I missed that.
Yeah, let me modify it and then I'll show you.
Okay.
I thought it was going to let us upload the file and do the text assignment, but it looks like Canvas is like prefers one or the other. So I'm just going to modify it. So give me 1 second. Okay, so this is how you're going to do it. You're going to hit start assignment. You're going to hit choose file. You're going to upload your .zip file. And then in the comments right here, you're going to answer your 3 questions. So, you know, added routes, need DB info showing in front end, and help reviewing router. So when you hit submit assignment, it will submit both the zip file for you and the comments, and then I will take a look at the comments from there. Any questions on that? Please make sure that you've separated out those 3 questions so it's clear, hey, this is what I got done. Hey, this is what I'm working on next. And finally, hey, this is what I need help with. Any questions? Okay,
No.
we are going. Oh, go ahead.
I'm saying no.
Okay. So we are going to move on to our ERD library exercise. This was requested by Larry and I think a couple other people. We are going to build an ERD, an entity relationship diagram for a library. So you're all familiar with a library and what a library has and what information it needs to keep track of. But oftentimes diving right into the ERD can be challenging because we've got all of these diagrams and shapes and we've got to think of our tables. So I find it's often helpful to start with a brainstorm and just do it in a scratch pad, do it in a Google Doc. And from that Google Doc, we can always adjust and build our ERD, the actual diagram from there. So let's think about a library. What kind of information would need to be stored in a library for a library to work properly?
Books.
Books. And what about books do we need to store?
Title. Author.
Author.
ISBN.
genre.
Oh,
But the Dewey Decimal System, like the call numbers.
Availability.
The year.
how many?
What else do we need to store in a library?
More information for people who have library cards, stuff like
So let's
that.
call them patrons. And what do we need to know about the patrons other than their library card number?
Their name, address.
Data-
Email address.
What?
Email address, maybe.
What books they have out, if any. Their status, whether they're in good standings or bad standings because they got a book out too long.
Oh yeah, any outstanding fines? I guess that's part of status.
Books that they have on hold.
I would say some form of personal information, like usually they have like their
Wish list.
you have to give them something in order to get a library card. So that I think they store that.
ID, the identification card, ID card.
We'll skip that for now.
Okay.
But yeah, that's more to get the card. Okay, now when we break this down, what do we see here that could cause a headache in the database?
Patrons have books.
Patrons have books, so there's going to be something going on there. So what we're going to actually do is we're just going to pull up an open spreadsheet. So I'm just going to open a new spreadsheet, and I'm going to call this library. And the one rule of thumb, and we've gone over this as database normalization, is that we can never store more than one piece of information in a cell. So whenever we've got multiple pieces of information in a cell, we need to break that out into its own table. So I'm going to start with books. And in my books, I'm going to fill out some data. So I'm going to go to my books and I'm going to say, hey, my title, author, ISBN, genre, call number, availability, year, how many in stock, and out of stock quantity. Let's do in stock. Okay, so title, we'll say one of my favorite books, Aragon by Chris Paolini. The ISBN, I don't know, we're just going to say 123. Genre is fantasy. Call number would be PAO, and then let's just say 123.1. Availability. What is availability? This is the first time that we run into, do we need availability if we're keeping track of how many are in stock and how many are out of stock?
No.
No.
Okay, so we're going to delete availability. The year.
Max.
Yep.
So I got a question. When you consider in stock, is it like they have the book in their system, but it's out, or in stock is they have the book and it's in the library, right? Because out of stock,
Availability could be take both of those columns out and just show the quantity of how many are available.
right? Either it's there or it's not.
And then the on hold quantity would be, I guess, how many patrons have them out. I'm not sure how you.
So the problem of a couple different ways of solving it. It depends how granular you need to get, because if they have 3 copies of it and you need to know which patrons have which copy, then you need to architect your database a little differently here. But for the sake of let's call it maybe on shelf quantity, checked out quantity, and then on hold quantity. Maybe those are better labels. So we've got 1 on the shelf, we've got 2 checked out, and 3 people are dying to get that book, so they've got it on hold. So now we can say, oh, the library has 6 copies total because we can add those together.
Well,
okay.
What's on hold?
And you said they got 6 if you got 3 people.
We got 3 on hold. We got 3 in
books.
3 on hold, but 1 is actually on. 3 are on the hold shelf. 1 is on the shelf for someone to pick up, and then 2 people have it checked out.
Okay, makes sense now. Thank you.
Okay, so now we say, okay, well, Christopher Paolini wrote another book. So we say Christopher Paolini has also written what his other book was. The next one was called Eldest. Still from Chris Paolini, but what rule of database normalization are we breaking here?
I don't know which number.
1, 2, 3 again twice.
He's repeated.
The author is repeated.
Right, so we can break him out and put an author table.
Bingo. So because we've got Chris Paolini in here twice, we are duplicating data. So in order to not duplicate this data, we put him in a new table called authors. And the authors are going to get an author ID. They're going to get their first name and their last name. And so we're going to say author ID 1. And now what happens? What happens if Chris Paolini gets married and changes his name? Or what if he decides to say that his first name didn't match his gender identity and he wanted to change it, right? Or what happens? Now we need to go in the database and change it for each one of his books. But instead, what we can do is we can change this to an author ID column and say, hey, Chris is author number 1. And that 1 lines up with the author ID right here. So now when Chris changes his last name when he gets married, we can change it in this one place. And the database knows, because it's all referencing author ID 1, we don't need to change it on each individual book. So that adds we should also have a book ID here. Say 1, 2. Okay. What else did we say is, what other table did we say we needed?
The patron table.
So we're going to say, okay, the patrons, we're going to get a patron ID, and they're going to get their library card number and their name and their address and their email and their what books checked out. Say checked out books. We're going to say status, fines amount, and books, they on hold books. Okay. So patron ID 1, my library card is 987. My name is Max Matthews. My address is the Tech Garden downtown. Email. Okay, and now I run into checked out books. Well, let's say that I have Aragon and Eldest checked out. Well, I don't want to put Aragon and Eldest in as the title, because what happens if another author comes up with a book and calls it Eldest as well? Well, now how do I know what Eldest I have out? Do I have the one the other author wrote, or do I have the one Christopher Paolini wrote? How do we solve that problem?
Can't you just use the ISBN number?
We could use the ISBN number, but it would be better to use the book ID that our database is generating for us, just in case like the ISBN changed or there got digits added to it, or it would be better to reference this, although in your case, you're not wrong because this should be a unique number. But it's often better to use the IDs that our database is generating as opposed to the IDs that someone else's database generated. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, oh, I've got book 1 and 2 checked out. What's wrong with that?
That's 2 items in 1 slot.
So how do we solve for that?
On a table.
Does it have to be a string or an object?
No, we can't store objects in the database. We need to create what is called a bridge table. So we're going to say checked out books. Now, what are we storing in the checked out books?
Pretty much all that
of books
over there.
So we're going to be careful there. We're going to say the only 2 things we are storing in this table are going to be the book ID and the patron ID. So what we can then say is, oh, Max is patron ID 1. And he's got 2 checked out books, book ID 1 and book ID 2. So this table is sitting between our books table where we can reference the book ID and get all of this information here. And it's sitting between the patrons table so that because patron ID is 1 here, I can get all of the information from here. What is the SQL term we would use to get the information from this table to include the information from the patrons and books table?
Join.
A join, exactly. We would join that data together, and in SQLize, that is called an association, because the patrons table is associated to the books table through the checked out books. So we can finish this up here. We no longer need this checked out books table anymore because this column, because we're tracking that information in checked out books. So now we say status. Maybe this is a good standing or bad standing, right? It's a true false. So let's say we'll rename this to good status, and we'll say true. Good boy, I always return my library books on time. My fines amount, I'm going to say is $0. And now what do we run into on hold books?
We got 2 books out.
Exactly. So we can't do on hold books. We would need to do another table for that. For the sake of time and brevity and knowing how much time we have, how much content we have to get through, I'm going to save doing that table, but it would be very similar to checked out books. Okay. We've done all of this. We've played around in our spreadsheet. Now we have revised our brainstorm down to these columns and have identified we need a bridge table. So the next step from here is, now that we've played around, we need to create our ERD. The ERD we are going to create at diagrams.net. So remember that good old, I'm going to discard that. I'm going to discard that. And I wonder how many files I have. I'm going to create a new diagram. And I'm going to scroll down until I find my entity relationship diagram, and I'm going to create that. And I'm going to call it library ERD. Drop that in my downloads folder. Okay. It has already put some tables in here for me. So I'm going to start by saying, hey, we started with our books table. And our books table, we are going to say, has a book ID. And that book ID is the primary key. In other words, it is unique to the table. And that primary key we are going to use to link to foreign keys in other tables. We'll see how we do that in 1 second. The other things that we recognized from our books ID or our books table, we can just pull right off the spreadsheet. So we can say in our books, we had a title. And then over here, if we go to the Arrange tab, down here, there is an Insert New Row button. So I'm going to click that a couple times to get new rows. And I'm going to say, hey, we also have the author ID. We've got the ISBN. We've got the genre. We've got the call number. And year. And QTY on shelf. And QTY checked out. And finally, QTY on hold. Now, I just realized we have a problem. We can actually figure out the quantity that's on hold based off of the number of times this book ID shows up on the books on hold table. So what rule does that break? If we're storing the books on hold in another table, why can't we have quantity on hold in this table?
Might break the relationship if we do something to that. I forgot what the rule. I know it's 3. But...
Duplicating data.
It's kind of duplicating data. It's that we should never store a calculated value in the database. So whenever we can count the number of copies on hold due to whatever's in the other table, we should never store it here. Because what happens if we put that book on hold, we update it in the other table, but we forget to update it here. So instead, it's better in our database to never store anything calculated and instead say, hey, we can figure out the quantity on hold by counting the number of times this book ID shows up in the on hold table. So we're actually going to get rid of that one and say, okay, now we also have our patrons table. And our patrons are going to have a patron ID. And they're going to have some other information, right? So let me just get rid of this. And I'm going to add a whole bunch of rows. And I'm going to say our patron has a library card. Say card number. They've got a name. They've got an address. They've got a email. They've got a status, and they've got a fines amount. Okay, and last table we need is, oops, our
authors.
Checked out books. Oh, we do have an authors. Let me do that really quickly. Authors, and we said first name and last name. And I just need to take some of these rows out. And now, okay, why is it green? Diagrams, why do you hate me? That kind of makes it really hard to see. Oh, I just set a background by accident. Okay, that was weird. Okay, so our author ID. Now we get to a fun part. Where do we use our author ID? We use our author ID here. So what we do to show that this authors table is related to this books table is we come into this little column here and we say, hey, author ID is a foreign key, an FK. And the reason it's a foreign key is because it's not native to this table. This foreign key links to this primary key down here. So what we do is we hover over this row, we get this little arrow, and we draw this arrow up to the author ID there. Larry, go ahead.
Does a foreign key have to be from a primary key in another table?
It should. I don't know if the rule is it has to be, but it should be because primary key is always unique. So that way you don't run into any unique issues of, well, what if I have two authors with the same ID? If the author ID is a primary key, it does not, you don't run into that issue.
Okay, thank you.
And so we're going to do the same thing, checked out books. Actually, well, we'll say checked out ID. And then this is going to have our book ID and our patron ID. And we get rid of a couple rows. And now we want to do a little rearranging because our patrons actually are going to be between our checked out books and our patrons. So we say, hey, this book ID right here, we're going to highlight that, get the arrow and drag it to the book ID. Because it's connecting now, this becomes foreign key 1, and our patron ID right here is going to connect to, give me the arrow, there we go, to our patron ID right here. So this becomes foreign key number 2. And that is how we set up what we call a bridge table to solve a one-to-many relationship, where the, let me make this bigger so you guys can actually see it all. The patron may have many books checked out. So, and there may be many books that the patrons have checked out. So because there is a many-to-many relationship between many books they may have checked out, we create what is called this bridge table in between. So now this is representing our database. So what we would be able to do is take this right into Sequelize and start creating these fields because we've planned out what our database is supposed to look like. Now, this is by no means a complete ERD, right? There are many other tables that we might have to create so the library can keep track of everything, but this would be a good starting place. Larry, go ahead.
You said the bridge table is for a many-to-many relationship?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So you break it down because there may be many patrons that have many books out, or there may be many books that many patrons have out. So what you do is you break it down. You say, hey, every time there is a checked out book, that checked out book belongs to one patron. So you basically say there are many books that can be checked out, but there are many patrons to one checked out book. So you kind of bridge that and break this from a many to many to a many to one to many.
Can you just say ERD again, just because I need to stick like what the word is again?
Entity relationship diagram. So this obviously looks, we'll do it in reverse. We'll take each letter by letter. This is a diagram, right? The flow chart's a type of diagram. We can look at this, and if I showed you this and said, what is this? You would be able to say, no idea what it means, but it looks like a diagram. That's the D part of ERD. The E part is an entity. Why they don't call it a TRD, a table relationship diagram, no freaking idea why. But each entity is a table. So books is a table. Checked out books is an entity or a table. Patrons is a third table. And then our authors is a fourth table, which is synonymous to an entity. So each table that you see here is an entity. And then the R part of the entity relationship diagram is the relationship. how do we know this author ID matches up with this author ID down here? We draw a line from this row up to this row, so we know the two are related. Now, there is special symbols that you can put on either end of the line to show that it's a one-to-many relationship, but just getting started in ERD land, this is actually a pretty good place to get started.
Can you repeat the connection? So from books to checked out books.
Yeah, so there is only ever one book ID.
One join in the ERD.
Yeah, basically because there can't be multiple book IDs and patron IDs here. This is what breaks down. There are many books to one book in the checked out table, and there are many patrons to one patron ID in the checked out books. So you basically have a many to one to many relationship.
Okay, thank you.
Right? There's only ever one book ID and only ever one patron ID in the checked out books. That's the one relationship, but there could be many books or many patrons that have checked out books. So this breaks the many to many. Many patrons could have many checked out books down to there may be many books, but they have one checked out book ID, and there may be many patrons, but they only have one patron ID in the checked out books table.
And PK is primary key. What is FK?
FK is foreign key, meaning it is a primary key in another table.
And just one more time real quick so I can make sure I got it. So patrons can have many books can belong to many patrons, but a book can only be checked out one book to one patron.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
How are we feeling about ERDs? Does it make more sense now?
Yes.
Yeah, you said something about multiple, like if you were to extend this, you said it was multiple, I'm trying to figure out what you said.
Or tables or entities?
You said you can bridge, you were explaining the bridges, like if you said they wanted to extend it somewhere else, basically like with the mini something, but I gotta think of the term you used. Right now.
Christy, go ahead.
So my question is, because I have not had good experiences with this. I actually drew.
Nothing wrong with that.
I drew something. I got this paper and I got another paper. Like I drew something very similar to what you have.
Perfect.
So my question is, in the work world, our employers are going to require you to use diagrams.net or would a whiteboard be?
So it depends. I work for a startup. My boss could care less if I've done an ERD before I start doing stuff in the database. He would lose his crap, though, if there was a bug in the database due to me duplicating data in two different places because I didn't recognize, hey, quantity of books checked out could be calculated. So if he went into our software one day and went, how does it say that there are only 2 books checked out, but there's a list of 10 people that that I can see on the admin side that have that checked out? I would be like, bad database design? And he'd be like, well, where did you plan that out? Where did you think in advance on that? And if the answer is, I didn't, I just started going in my SQLized models and screwing around, obviously that would be a problem. However, he could care less if I did the ERD in diagrams.net or OmniGraffle or any of those. So the tool does, or on paper or on a whiteboard, but if all of a sudden I need to take this and hand this off to a junior developer who may not have database design experience, now that paper copy is going to be much harder to scan and send to them, and then they got to read my handwriting. And so at a certain point, I would say, all right, I'm going to invest in a digital tool here, whether I tough it out through diagrams.net and become BFFs with it, or whether I go find another tool. I really like OmniGraffle. It's expensive, but it's a great tool if you're doing a lot of diagramming. That is a great alternative. It's a Mac-only app, but it is that is completely fine. But if you go into a big organization, if you go into Ernst & Young and you're doing consulting work, they're going to say, hey, we buy this software for you. We give you OmniGraffle and we pay for that. And if you're not using that, it becomes a security risk of not knowing where the files are being saved. It becomes a readability risk of when we hand this off to the database engineer, they may not be able to read it because the formatting looks a little different. It opens up other issues there. So it really depends on the company. Some companies are going to say, we don't trust our developers with ERDs. That's the database engineer's job to come up with that. And they will hand you this ERD and say, this is what the data looks like, deal with it. Or you may be in a small company and need to plan out the whole project and say, okay, I've got 40,000 different columns that I need to keep track of. What do my database models look like?
So as a novice, what would be, is this something we should ask in the interview first? And then what level would we be expected to create? Like, is this something we would start with and then build up to?
Again, depends on the company and the role. Some companies will be structured in a way that they say, hey, our junior level developers are front-end web developers. They don't get to touch the back end. They don't get to touch the database. We give them pretty pictures from designers and they implement those pretty pictures in HTML. One company could take that approach and say, go do that for a year, show me that your coding chops are good. And if they are, when the next time a junior backend position comes up, you'll be eligible for that job and you can transfer. That could be some companies. Other companies, like my company, we say all of our developers, we want to be full stack. So we've got a senior UX designer and developer that makes all the mockups and codes out all of our front end code. But even for them, we require them to work in the back end every now and then. We're not going to dump a back end heavy feature on them and say, hey, you've got to go build all of this out. But every now and then when a bug pops up where it's something they can fix in the back end, we require every now and then that they go in there and they're familiar with that code. For our junior devs, we have 2 junior full stack developers right now, where I dump things on them and I say, you got to go fix it. And if you don't know how to fix it, you can come back to me and we can talk through it. But when they come to me and they go, oh, it's a problem in the back end, I go, and you've got the back end code, go fix it in the back end. Or, oh, it's a problem in the database. All right, go fix it, right? I hired you as a full stack developer. I expect you to work in the front end and the back end and in the database. So it really depends on the company structure. I wouldn't get quite down to the level in an interview of saying, am I required to make ERDs? But I would ask in an interview, what does a 9 to 5 look like for one of our developers or one of your developers? When I come in, you know, after the first couple weeks, after I'm onboarded, after I'm up and running, where would I be spending my time? How would you give me tasks to work on? What kind of expectations would you have from me? What kind of mentorship would you have if I get stuck? Those are all really good questions to ask. Maybe not down to the level. You could always ask what tech stack they use or what tools they use. And asking tech stack is a good thing to know. But I wouldn't get down to the level of like, would you ever make me make an ERD?
No, I wouldn't say that, but yeah, I'm just wondering. I mean, I know it's worth revisiting like everything else to go back and revisit all of the stuff, but I just wondered going in how important it would be.
Yeah, and it depends on the role, right? If you apply to be a junior database engineer, you can bet your butt that you're going to have to be making some ERDs. But if you come in as a front-end web developer, I would be horrified if they asked you to make an ERD as a front-end developer.
Okay.
But trading tools, right? As a front-end developer, maybe I expect you to know Sketch or some mock-up program or Figma or InVision to the point where you can start designing some things. And again, depends on the job role. Some web front-end developers only write code. Some jobs think front-end developer means you need to design all of the stuff and then code it all out. So it depends on the role. Danielle, go ahead.
Okay, I have two questions. One in the ERD, where would you find the cardinality arrows? Because last time that we had the assignment, I couldn't find those arrows.
Yeah, so if you click on the arrow itself, on the line itself and have it selected, over here is one of the cardinality arrows. So right in the style tab under the line section, under the 1PT, the cardinality arrow should be in here. So
okay, I see them right there.
Many, and that's going to do the right side. And then if you click here,
it's the none, I think.
Yeah, if you click on the one right to the left of it, you can scroll down and get the cardinality on the other side.
Okay, so that answered my first question. Thank you. The second question is, I don't understand the purpose of the cardinality arrows because they seem kind of redundant. Like if you're saying none, many, some, more than one, like, I don't know. To me, it seemed redundant. So can you give me an example where you would need to use those?
So I happen to share your viewpoint. I think the cardinality arrows are one of the hardest parts to figure out on the ERD and the least useful things when you're actually developing out the models and getting it going in SQL. I think they're the least useful part of the ERD in my opinion. However, I know several database engineers that would go find soap to wash my mouth out with if I told them that. With that said, the general idea on the cardinality arrows is that there could be many books, but when it gets to the checked out table, there would only be one of them. So there's only ever one book ID in this table, but there could be many books that show up once in the checked out books table. So basically what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to say, hey, on the left side, there is a many relationship. So there could be many books. So you would use the arrow on this side. And I'm forgetting, one is saying there could be no books or many books. And one is saying there must be at least one book or many books. And I can't remember the difference between the two. So I'm just going to pick one. And that puts the many point on that side. And then on this side, you would say there could only ever be one of them over here. Well, what did you do with my little line? Maybe I have to pick this one. There we go. So that's what the relationship should be, is you're saying there's only one book ID on this side, but there could be many book IDs over on this side. So you put the crow's feet, the many operator on here, and then the single line over here because there could only ever be one book ID over here.
All right, thank you. I understand it better now.
With that said, like I said, I share your opinion in that the cardinality operators are the least helpful point of the ERD. And honestly, sometimes I start right from the brainstorming step and I just start making my models. Sometimes I go, oh, I need to put this out into a table to figure out what the data looks like. When do I run into those issues where I say, oh, multiple people could have this book checked out, so I need another table. But oftentimes I find it's hard to go from this step directly to the ERD, because you're like, I've got all of these different columns and I don't really know what data is going into that. So oftentimes doing it in a spreadsheet and having multiple tables down here will be a really good starting point for figuring out the design of the tables and the data types and all of that stuff over here. Any other questions about the ERD?
That I just know I really don't want to work with it, so I probably won't be going to back end, I think. Not sure.
Well, you can go into back end, but not necessarily database, right? Most of my job, I spend, I don't know, 40% of my time in front end, 40% of my time in back end, and 20% of my time in the database. But that's going to be different at every job role. As a full stack web developer, you're almost guaranteed to have some database powering your backend. Although hypothetically, it is possible that you would have a backend that didn't have a database.
Okay. Thank you. So do you think? Oh,
go ahead.
So do you think I should take something else in regards to this? Because I'm probably gonna end up somewhere where I'm gonna need more clarity. I understand it 100%, but I should probably a little bit educate myself a little bit more on that then.
Yeah, so any LinkedIn Learning course on database design, oftentimes databases are taught as two separate courses. One is taught as database design, which is all about the ERDs and the data types and the table relations, and very little SQL actually in database design. It's all about the theory and the rules of normalization and data types and relational tables and stuff like that. That's kind of taught as one thing. The other thing is SQL, programming in SQL. And that's kind of like a whole second class of learning SQL syntax and learning how to actually write complex queries that are like 100 lines long, pulling data across different tables, getting more advanced with joins and stuff like that. So I actually took 2 semesters of SQL related classes, one for database design and one for SQL programming itself. So just keep in mind that while we kind of crammed all of this into a couple weeks, obviously there is a lot more content that you can learn out there on this.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question, but it's not related to ERDs.
That's fine, go for it.
All right, so it's kind of same like what Nicole was saying. If I wanted to strictly deal with the front end, is there other programs that would be beneficial to learn with doing front end development?
It depends how much you want to be on development and how much you want to be on design. So if you want to be doing the design itself of, hey, before I even write a line of code, I want to make a pretty interface and kind of think through all of that. That is a path that we don't really go down in CIC. That would be user interface design is the search term that you would want to use for that. And programs that you would see in there often are Sketch, Figma, InVision, and probably Photoshop. Photoshop is kind of the old man in the room and is not used as much anymore, but for user interface design in particular, because there are better tools for it. But if you were interested in interface design, it's very similar to database design versus database programming, right? You may hate SQL, but love figuring out what the right table structure is. The same goes for UI design. You may hate writing HTML and CSS, but you really love making a pretty UI and getting it to fit together and look right and all of that. So user interface design is all about the principles of, well, how many pixels of padding should I have between these things? What happens when I use a rounded button here, but a square box somewhere else? How do we use box shadows to make user interfaces feel like they've got depth to them? Why do certain color palettes go together well, other than, hey, this looks pretty? What's the design behind that? Design in terms of accessibility as well. Is my font size large enough? Do I have contrast issues? All of that stuff. So that is one field that you can go down is, hey, maybe I'm more interested on the design side of things. Or maybe I kind of straddle the line and do a lot of design work, but then can also turn around and write some kick-ass HTML and CSS and make that interface actually coded out.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
No problem. Other questions? I will put the ERD we just created in tonight's outline during break. So if you have any questions about that, or you want to reference it down the line, you can. ERD is not a requirement for your capstone. However, if you think it will help you, or if you want to do that brainstorming step on your capstone and then jump right into the database models, that is completely fine.
I have a question.
Go for it.
Do I need to start opening up files now?
No.
Okay.
I don't. Oh, everyone's going to hate me when we get to the ES6 review, but we've got a couple things to get to before that.
Why are we going to hate you?
I may have let the power go to my brain on pop quizzes and have an idea for tonight.
We had a pop from the last pop quiz. Hold on. Wait a minute.
This pop quiz is not going to be a, here's a 3-hour project, go do it and have fun. And we are going to review that, by the way. Any final questions on ERDs before we move forward? Okay, so before we dive into the pop quiz from last night, we will save that for after break. I put together a basic diagram for you guys, and I would like you I want to go through it with you guys, and if at any point you need me to repeat something or to phrase it in another way that makes more sense to you, let me know and we'll go from there. So we start with our front end. Front end, very generic term. We could have a front end in a mobile app or in a desktop app, or what we've been building, web applications. We also have our back end. Now we talk about what frameworks we use. So we used React in our front end. That's why we create React app. And in our back end, we use Node on the server, and we use the database. We happen to be using a SQL database called Postgres. Now, inside of those frameworks, sometimes, or inside of those packages or frameworks or servers or whatever it is, we sometimes use additional tools. So in React, we use React Router DOM. That's sitting up at our app level. That's what's doing all of the routing for us so that we know what page to show and what element or component to take them to. In Node, we use Express. And we use Express because that's what gives us easy access to server.get and body parser and cores, and Express is the framework that we've created all of our APIs in. And finally, in the database, we got our Postgres table, right? That's kind of another level down. We'll get to that in 1 second, but that's where our data is actually residing, right? And we're using our SQL queries to get in and out of that. Now from there, we go a step deeper and we say, hey, in our in our back end, we use Sequelize. And Sequelize is kind of tricky because it's not really in our Node and Express because it connects to the database, but it's also not only in the database because we write our models and our queries and all of that in Express. So it kind of spans both categories. So from there, we jump back to the front end. The front end has a route that takes us to a component. That component, for the sake of our example, let's say is the home page. When the home page goes to get data, it uses an effect which says, hey, run this code only when the component first loads. In that use effect, we're going to do a fetch. That fetch goes to the back end. When it comes back from the back end, we need to save that data in a certain way that React knows, hey, this data should show up in the return portion. So we set it into state. Whenever we update state, React is smart enough to go to our return and rerun that return using the new data. And the way it does that in the return is it maps over all of the data because the data coming back happens to be an array. And computers are terrible at dealing with multiple things. So what it does is it needs to deal with each individual thing. Pausing there, any questions? Diagram's only halfway filled in, but I want to make sure you guys have a chance for questions.
Yeah, Max, when you change state and it re-renders the return, it does not rerun the use effect?
Correct, as long as the dependencies array in the use effect is declared an empty.
Thank you.
And if it's not empty, it would only rerun that use effect if the things in that dependencies array had changed. Okay. From there, we said we did a fetch, but we've got to be able to fetch to somewhere. So we created our books endpoint. But our books endpoint needs to pull the data from somewhere. So what we need to do is give Sequelize a books model, so that Sequelize knows, hey, over in the database, here are the fields that are in that books model. So what we're able to do is start kind of tying all of that together. So we say, hey, this fetch right here is going over to the books endpoint. The books endpoint, oh, I'm sorry. And the way it's doing that is by making a request with some JSON in it. And that JSON is getting dealt with in the endpoint, and the response is coming back to the fetch. So the books endpoint then goes to the books model, and the books model then goes to the database to get that data. So it kind of starts on the left, zigzags all the way back to the database. The database gets the information, puts the car in reverse, and reverses through all of those lines to res.send the data back to the front end, which then goes into the state and the return in the map. Any questions on that? So the last thing we do is we also have that individual detail page, right? So if you clicked on any of the list items on your home page, it uses the params to get the ID out. That ID comes from our React router. So the link up in this component contained the ID. And then down here, we actually pulled the ID out using use params. Then we go through the same cycle. We use effect, we fetch. The fetch then goes to the backend. The backend goes to the books model, goes to the database. Database brings it back to the books endpoint. The books endpoint sends it back in the res via JSON. Then we hit the set state, and then we hit the return. We don't have a map in this one because we're only returning a single book's worth of data. Is that diagram helpful? Is that diagram obvious? Is that how you thought it was flowing? Give me some feedback on this.
Very helpful. I want a copy.
Yeah, that's all I could think about. My
it is linked to in tonight's outline.
Okay.
I took a picture of it, but I definitely think it's helpful because it kind of just break down how everything is flowing. And I think if you have this diagram and you get stuck, you can kind of refer back to it.
Cool. Danielle, go ahead.
I was going to say, I really think that this diagram is so useful. It should be integrated within like the next cohort. Like if you were to show this to me prior to us doing the back end, I really feel like I would have had a epiphany in that moment, like a light bulb moment, like, cause I'm having a light bulb moment now, like I actually get this and understand it. So this would be really beneficial at the beginning.
Cool. Thank you for that feedback.
I feel like we saw something like this, but maybe it should have been carried through, like each, because sometimes when you're saying it, it's like
Yeah.
you're looking at it, it's like you the teacher from Charlie Brown, but I definitely feel like having it in like this. And plus we've been doing this like within the last few days, so definitely it's like it's all like the light bulb moment. Ah.
So
Nicole,
this is
go ahead.
be available when we click it on the outline.
What's that?
When we click it on the outline, is it gonna pop up? Is it gonna be available? It wasn't available earlier in class.
Oh, thanks for calling me out on that.
Can you number it?
Available now. Yeah,
I'm trying to screenshot it now.
It's available now though, but I would say that numbering it would be awesome.
Yeah, a little bit. One more
Step 1, step 2.
Yeah.
So I will say, numbering it is going to make it really cluttered. But if you go into the document and you hit the little play button on the slideshow, when you hit the space bar, it's going to literally animate everything in for you so you can see step by step how it's all flowing.
Okay, perfect.
And that's why I wanted to link to the slideshow and not just like a PDF of it so that you can actually like play it yourself and go through step by step.
What did you click again? Because my
The
screen
little play slideshow in the top right. Okay. We're gonna do the poll and then we're gonna go on break and then we're gonna do the results of the poll. So you've got two options for reviewing what we did last night. You can either skip all the back-end stuff and say, hey, now that we've got our back-end models set up and endpoints, how do we make this work in the front end? And kind of start with a blank front end and the back end that's mostly done. Or we can review it from the beginning and go through step by step. How do we do that project from last night? With that said, if we go through from the beginning, it is going to be fast. So I need each and every one of you, if you pick that poll option, to react in some way and promise me that you will stop me if there's something you don't understand. However, if we pick the other option and pick with the starter code, because there is less things to cover, I can go through it a little bit more slowly.
How much of the backend is going to be set up?
Almost all of it, if not all of it.
Like all the routes and everything too?
Yes. But we're going to go through all of the stuff that is right here. We're going to do the routes and the components. We're going to do the use effect, the fetch, the set state, and the map. And then we're going to do a new route and component and the use params, the use effect, fetch, set state, return, and the link and the ID param. So either option you pick, we are going to do everything on the left side of this box.
Okay.
Or the front end box.
When you're...
Is there another option? Because I did that today.
This is no, it's a review. It's meant to be a review.
If you're going through the just the front end, are you still gonna show how it connects to the back end when you get to that part?
Yeah, we can go over it. It's just the back end part will be pre-written. I mean, I can share that code with you. It's not like I'm hiding any of it. But if you pick the pre-written option, I will still go through the back end steps. It just I won't be like writing them out as we do it. Okay. Any questions on the options before I launch it? I swear to God, if you guys tie it, not going to do either one of them. I'm just going to not review the project. Caitlin, you're going to have to be my tiebreaker since Ariel isn't here. if it ties. 10 votes in. And 12 students tonight. Voting going once. Voting going twice. Sold to the one that I was hoping we did, which is focus with some project setup already done. Mainly because I spent 15 minutes doing all the project setup before class. So we are going to take our break. When we come back, we are going to jump over to the code. I am not going to give you a zip of this code. We are only going to review at this point. So this is not a code along. You can always take this practice and start a new project on your own this weekend, or you can take what we're reviewing and do that for your list project, which is due for homework. I don't know if I created that homework assignment. I will also do that during.
I thought you said it wasn't.
Because we spent 3 hours in class, I feel like it's justified to not take those 3 hours from capstones. So I am going to create that assignment so that you guys can turn that in. But we are going to review everything. We will do a brief coverage of the back end when we start using that stuff. And then we will go from there on some other interview questions and stuff like that. Any questions before the break?
I have a question. It doesn't apply to everybody. It's just I want to ask you a question.
Yep.
So,
go for it.
So, well, you know how what we did, so in the portfolio, how we did home.css, and then that's where all our CSS code went?
Yep.
Where does that need to be imported? Like, I feel like
normally in the home component.
Only there, not everywhere?
Correct. Well, it depends. Do you want it to apply to other pages and other components?
Remember, the home has everything. It has the intro, the about, the contact.
So the CSS in the home file will apply to the home component or any components in the home component. But it will not apply to the portfolio page, to the project page, because the project page is not part of home.
So would you need to import it on the project page?
If you wanted it to apply everywhere, but at that point, you shouldn't call it home.css. You should call it app.css because it applies everywhere.
So should I move it back from home? So, or should I have it in both places?
No, you should move it back and name it app if you want one CSS file to apply everywhere. But best practice in React is to split up your files so you have one CSS file for every component. And it only applies to that component.
I had it like that and I changed it back. Okay, so take it out of home.css, put it in app.css, and then it's going to apply everywhere. But then
you need to import app.css and app.js.
Only in app.js and not because the rest of.
Correct, because app.js has every other component in it. App.js has home in it, home has portfolio in it, and contact and about and all of that. So because you're putting the CSS up in app, all of your other components are included through app. Would I delete home.css? If you move it to app.css, then yeah.
And then okay. I might have another question again. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before we go on break?
When we get close to the link again, can you like clarify that and like more if it's on a button or if it's how it's supposed to work around? Because I done went through so many different ones and I'm not sure which one.
Yep. We're gonna build a list from scratch tonight, and it will use the link.
Okay, and quickly, how long is break gonna be?
20 minutes, 7:20.
All right, thank you.
I have one question, Max.
Yep.
It's about last night's project. So I don't know if we're gonna get to this tonight, but I'll just show you.
Can always
So-
ask the question and then I can put it off to the end of class if it's too in-depth.
So I have my list and I click on one item, it shows me that item, and I tried making forward and back buttons, which you see here, it's band 1. I go forward, it takes me to what it calculates as the next item, but it doesn't load it. But if I hit return, it does load it.
You need to add I bet you have a warning that says React hook use effect on your React terminal. It says React hook use effect has missing dependencies, params.id, either include it or remove the dependency array. So what you need to do is say, hey, use effect is not only going to run and make the API call to set the state when the page first loads, it's also going to update whenever params.id changes. So in your line 17, throw params.id in there. What's happening is the component is still mounted, but because the ID changed, the fetch call isn't happening.
So how is it different than when I hit return? That's reloading.
When you refresh it, it forces a remount of the component.
Look at that. Thank you, Max.
Glad I have the answer to that one.
I am too.
All right.
See you in 19 minutes.
You said put it in project.js too. .css work.
Take a step back from everything. What you're saying is you want one CSS file that's going to apply everywhere. So you're going to create app.css right next to app.js. You're going to paste everything in from home.css into it. You're going to go to app.js and import app.css. And because app.js literally has every other component in it, through inheritance, through going through, all the different files, you don't need CSS anywhere else. So delete home.css, which should now be empty, and delete any imports to home.css anywhere else.
Yeah, I got all the error messages, so I had to. So, okay. And then, so project.js, I don't need to.
Nope, because project.js comes in through app.js.
And that's really just the back end of the portfolio.
Yes.
Okay.
But portfolio and project aren't actually imported through each other or tied to each other. They go through the router to make the link work.
Okay. I got it. Thank you.
Cool. Go on break. See you guys at 7:20. That's better. Okay, so in our db.js, we authenticate, we say that we're connected to the database, and we sync it. Syncing it is going to take any of our existing models and make sure the tables for them exist in the database. It will not change the models to update the tables in the database, but it will create any new tables for us based off of our models if the table doesn't exist. If something goes wrong, we want to know about it, so we catch the error. We say connect to database, and finally, we export out both the database and the model so we can use that model in other places. The reason why we put this here is that we want to get access to the book after we have connected to the database. So when we import things, we are going to make sure to import them from our DB file. Now, our database needs to know, what does a book look like? Sequelize needs to know what a book looks like so that when it's talking back and forth with the database, it can know what data types to expect and what columns. So we go to book.js, we require Sequelize, we get access to the database through our db.js. So this db right here with all of the connection information gets passed into the book right here. That db flows all the way into this db right here, so that when we db.define, it's all the same database. So we define the book model, and we put an ID on it. ID is a little special because it needs auto increment and primary key and all that good stuff. And it also creates the title, author, and year, which are 2 strings and an integer. Now at this point, if we go back to our server.js, when we pull in db in book, it's flowing through db.js, it's flowing through the book, and now in the server, when we start all of this up and do an npm run, we can go over to our beekeeper, connect to the database, change it to library if it's not on the right one, and now when we look at our books, we can see the ID, title, author, and year have all been created for us. So I went ahead and loaded up some books into our database. And I did that by just hitting the plus button here. I left the ID blank because that will be generated for us. I filled in the title, author, and year. And then for the created at, because it's a timestamp, I just typed the words now into both of them. And because of that, it will, the parentheses afterwards are telling SQL, hey, actually drop in the current timestamp. Zach, go ahead.
What would happen if you actually tried to type in the ID?
If it was a valid ID, it would actually let you. So if you put in number 4 there, it should work fine. But if you put in number 1, because 1 was already taken, it would yell at you and say that ID already exists.
Oh, okay.
Larry, go ahead.
And which step did the table for book actually get created? I know it got defined, but what was the part that connected it and made it say, hey, show up in the database now?
So we have to define the model. This is the model, the book model is telling it what column names and data types it is. But in server.js, we do in db.js, we do this sync here. That sync command is actually what makes the table get created.
Okay, thank you.
And that sync doesn't get called until we do connect to DB, and then we call connect to DB down here. And then all of this file doesn't run until we go to server.js and pull it in right here.
Okay, thank you.
Zach, go ahead.
So you could create like the whole database and the table and everything from VS Code?
Yep.
And would that happen once you did npm run start?
Yes.
Okay.
As long as you required the DB file, as long as the DB file had the model imported and was calling sync, which is calling connect to DB, as long as all of those requirements are met, yes, you could do everything in VS Code as soon as you start the server.
Quick question based on what Zach just asked.
Yep.
So I'm sorry, Doug. So is it creating the database, or the database was already created? Because does the Postgres have to connect to somewhere?
Good question. Good clarification. It will not create the database. It will only create the tables. In order to create the database, we do need to go to Beekeeper and run a create new database. Right here, doesn't matter which one we're in, and then I called mine library. But you do need to create the database, because in order for Sequelize to connect, it needs to connect to an existing database.
And if the database hadn't been created, then it would just give you that like 404 error?
It wouldn't give you a 404 because it doesn't connect to the database over HTTP, but it definitely would give you an init connection error, and you would get this panic DB problems.
And
Okay.
it also won't connect. And it also won't create the tables.
Correct, because there's no database that it can create the tables in.
Hey, Max, question. In Beekeeper, I guess I'm missing like the disconnect with the titles of like the author, the title, and all of that. Are you populating that inside of Beekeeper, or does it automatically? Got you. So this, you're basically filling in right here what you want to show up in those titles here.
I'm making the columns be defined, but I'm not putting the title and author and year data in. So I'm only creating the columns of the table. I'm not actually putting rows into the table.
Okay, thank you.
Doug, go ahead.
In DBJS, what exactly does the DB authenticate?
This is a test command to make sure that it can run a select query and get results back from it. So the authenticate, I would actually prefer it to be renamed to db.test, but it's basically an easy way to make sure that there isn't any error in the database. And if there is an error, it would throw and it would hit our catch down here. But it's basically db.authenticate is a way of running a command, a query, without having to write a query ourselves.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so the rest of our backend is actually pretty easy. I did go to Beekeeper, and once I got the server up and running and everything, I went to the books table and I added a couple rows in here. I added 3 different books. Now I've got my server.get. This is what shows up when I go to localhost 3001, right? I just want to send back some data. This isn't technically a requirement, but it is a requirement. It's just an easy way to say, hey, if someone goes to my backend by accident, have some message for them or have something at the root URL. These two we are going to cover in 1 second once we get to the front end. And then finally, the server.listen. If you don't put this in and run your npm run start, it will start the server, recognize that you want all of these endpoints, not think that you want to listen for any of those incoming requests, and will stop the server. The server.listen is actually what gets the server running in the background, listening for the requests to the endpoints coming in from the front end. We specify the port, and then we do a console.log server running just so we know everything is hunky-dory. Any questions on back end before we switch to the front end?
Not on my.
On the front end, the only project setup that I have done, I npx create React app, I npm installed React router DOM, I deleted out the stuff in our app.js, and I just imported browser router routes and route. So pretty basic project here, right? I haven't done much setup other than React router DOM. I've created no other files, nothing other than that. I am just focused on getting us to a blank spot. So before I forget, I'm going to go to my back end. I'm going to open my integrated terminal. I'm going to npm run start. Connected, everything's good there. I'm going to go to my front end. I'm going to open integrated terminal, and I'm going to npm run start. And again, I really recommend that you do not try to code along with me tonight. This is all about understanding. Okay, so on my home page, it's just a white screen. Why is it a white screen? Well, in my app, I don't have any route set up yet. So I'm going to go create a new file called home.js, and I'm going to create a basic component. So I say const home, it's an arrow function. It's going to return a div that has an h1 in it that says home, And then in order to be able to import this file in my app.js, I need to export it first. So in order to export it, I go to home and I say export default home. Then in my app.js, I can import my home from my ./home. The / is saying, hey, the home.js file is in the same directory as my app.js file, so we don't need folders to navigate around. Now I create a route for it. So I say my route is the path is going to just be a /. You could do /home if you wanted to, but I want it to show up first thing when we load the page. And we're going to put an element in, and the element is going to link to home. Don't forget your arrows around this component, otherwise the router does really weird stuff. So I go back to my browser and the word home shows up. Okay, now on that home component, I want the names of all of the books to show up, the titles, but no other information. I literally just want a bullet point for each one of the books. So I go back to my code, I go to my home, and I say, okay, how do I get code to run the first time the component shows up? How do I make my API call happen, but I don't want it to happen whenever I set state or whenever. I only want it to happen the first time the component shows up. In order to do that, we need to use a hook. And the hook is probably the second most used hook in all of React, and it is called useEffect. Coming right in from good old-fashioned React, we say useEffect, and we put a function in there, and the way we tell that useEffect only run for the first time is we put in an empty array. Now from that empty array, we get into some issues because React doesn't like us putting the word async here. It's very picky with useEffect, and it says it does not want async useEffects. So what we do instead is we create a new function. We're going to call it getBooks. Now that can be an async, and it's happy to do that, but we can't forget to call it. So we call our getBooks. Pausing there, any questions?
No.
So what exactly does getBooks do?
Jack shit right now. We just set it up to be an async function, but because we haven't put anything in it, it doesn't do anything right now, other than know to run when the component first gets mounted, and then it goes to do that, and it's like there's nothing in there. What it will be doing is the fetch, the JSON parsing, and the setting into state. But we're going to write that code in 1 second.
Max,
Yep.
You said, so the useEffect, when there's no parameter in the array at the end, it only runs when the component first mounts.
Yep.
If it gets remounted, it runs again. Like say
if it gets unmounted and remounted, it will run again. Yes.
Okay, so like if you have a route to a different component and then you come back to this component, it'll run again.
Rerun. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. You state, Nicole, ask me that when we start using it.
Oh, okay. I thought you guys did.
Nope, no use state yet. Just useEffect. So now, where are our book? Oh, sorry, Zach, go ahead.
Does it rerun anytime you stop the server and rerun it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, stopping the server and rerunning the server causes the browser to refresh the page, and refreshing the page is the equivalent of unmounting and remounting. Okay. So in our getBooks, we know our books are back in our beekeeper. Eye on the prize, here's the title. We need to get access to all of this, but we're in the front end. So if we go back to that diagram from tonight, We're here. We're in home right here. We need to get to the books endpoint, to the model, to the database, and all the way back through to get to home. And the way we kick all of that off is with our fetch. So we go to our code and we say const, I'm in the wrong spot. Being here. Const response equals await, and we're using the await. We need the async. We have it. Fetch to localhost 3001/books. Now, before we do anything on the front end, we go find books on our back end. What does books look like on our back end? That's right here. Get is the default method. If we don't tell fetch to use any other method type, it will default to get. Okay, now the books request is coming in. The request contains any information from the front end. We don't really care about whatever's in the request. We know they were requesting the books. That's all we need to know. So we res. What's the res? That's the response. The response to the request is going to send back this object called books. Where are the books coming from? We're going to wait for all the books to be found from the database. How do we know it's the database? It's coming in from our DB file right up here. And then we happen to give it an option to order by ID. We don't necessarily need to do that, but that will just sort it so that the newest books are on the top. Okay, now we have made it all the way through the books model to the database. Now we go all the way back in reverse. Sequelize gives the books back to the endpoint. The endpoint now needs to respond to the request in the response to send the JSON back. So it's coming all the way back to our fetch. So we go into our fetch. Now our response is here, but it's in JSON, and JSON is stupid because we can't deal with it. It's a string. So we need to parse it out. We say const data equals await our response dot JSON. That JSON is coming from the response, which is part of our fetch. Now we can console log the data. Haven't touched state yet, but we've done enough stuff in this whole flow that we want to see our data in the front end. So I go to my localhost 3000. Doesn't look like anything's here, but if I inspect and go to the console, I've got this object here. And if I open that object, it's got books. And if I open my books, here are the 3 books. Pausing for questions. Now that we see everything, pausing for questions.
Yeah, I don't have my code up, but when I got to this spot last night, for some reason I wasn't getting the console log to log the data out.
Don't make sure you've got all of your awaits. If you ever get a promise showing up somewhere, it means you're missing your await. So await on both the fetch and the response.json, and then also an await on the books to get them from the database.
Okay, I don't think anything was showing up down there. All right.
Oh, the other thing you need to do, make sure you get your get books call in here, because if you define your whole async function and then forget to call it, it will never run.
I think I did, but thank you. I'll take a look.
And we're referring to our last night's code. Like I can pull that up. We're not just watching along. Okay.
Well, no. You do not need to code along with this books project. This is just a watch along. But if you want to refer to some code that you wrote, this is going to be very similar to the code from last night.
Okay, perfect.
Any other questions? I kept staring at the little UR screen sharing bar and I couldn't figure out what the pause was. And then I'm like, oh, it's not pause screen sharing, it's pause recording. Anyway, it's been recording. We're fine. Okay, we've got all of our books. The problem is we can't just use our books down here. Whenever we get data that is going to change, or whenever we have dynamic data coming in, we store that data in state. The reason we store it in state is whenever we update the state, this return dynamically goes through, figures out what has changed, and updates it all. So think way back to pre-React, whenever we updated our data, whenever we changed a movie seat, we had to call update HTML. And update HTML had to go through all the movie seats again and generate out each individual one and stick it back in the browser. But React is smart. It's saying, hey, I understand that this data is dynamic. I understand that this data is going to change. So whenever you set this data into state, I'm going to go into this return, figure out what has changed, and update that on the screen for you. In order for all of that magic to happen, we need to use state from React. So I put my books and my set books up here. I say use state, and I'm going to say, hey, my books are starting out as an empty array. And I'm going to be careful and say books, plural, because I'm getting multiple books back from the database. Now I'm going to bridge the gap. If I go back to my diagram, I've got my fetch done. I need to set it into the state, and then I can deal with the return and the map. So I set my state by simply saying set books to the books inside of the data. Now my books are in state, and I know that because this isn't light, but my books are light. The reason my books are light is because I haven't told my return how those books should look. So I come in here and I say, hey, I want to go over all of my books. So I'm going to put them all in an unordered list. Then I can't just say, show my books. I need to go through each individual book and tell React what my book should look like. So I'm going to map over all of my books to get access to each individual book. And every time that I see a new book, I want to return a new list item with the book.name. Where's the name coming from? It is flowing all the way from my book.js. It's actually not flowing all the way through my book.js because my book doesn't have a name. It has a title. So I should probably use that instead. So this model is flowing to my server. My server is flowing to my book. My book is flowing to my get endpoint. My get endpoint is flowing to my fetch. My fetch is flowing into the state. The state is flowing into the return. The return is mapping over each one and giving me access to each individual one. And now I'm getting access to the title all the way through the database. And I'm going to try and do this. Get your screenshot fingers ready. Does it make more sense to go from the front end to the back end or the back end to the front end?
Front end to the back end for me.
Okay. We start at the book title. The book comes from our map. Our map comes from our state. Our state comes from our set books. Our set books comes from our data. Our data comes from the response. The response comes from our fetch to books. Our books comes to our, oh, I need to scroll up a little bit. Our books lines up with our books right here. Our books go into book. Book comes from the database. The database has access to the book here and knows that that book has a title right here. Does that look like a madman drawing on a whiteboard? Yes, but hopefully the explanation makes sense. Questions there before we move forward? Nicole, do you understand state at this point?
I just know, yeah, I understand.
Okay.
Is it the DB comma book in the top right one? Is that kind of saying, that, no, I can't get my words straight. I'll come back.
Okay.
It's saying like database, go to the database and go to books in the database. That's how it's saying.
Yeah, it's basically saying, hey, when we use book, understand that that book has these columns on it. So whenever we say book.findAll, it is using the model file for us that Sequelize is setting up. So because of this line right here, it knows whenever we call book here to go to this book up here, which is coming from the database file here. And the database file knows that the book is defined here with these columns.
So is the DB letting us know that book is a database, or is that what helps define book as a database, or am I just looking at it wrong?
It's not defining book as a database. It's defining book as a model for the table in the database.
For a model in the, say that last part, I'm sorry. For
book is a model for a table in the database.
Thank you.
Book doesn't actually have the data in it. Book just knows what the book table looks like. And then the rows in the database are coming in through that. And so we're looking at the rows in the table, and the rows are actually what has the data in it.
So is book with the little b the name of the database or the table?
I think with a little b is the name of the table, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this book right here is the name of the table. All right, any questions before I clear this? I tried an exercise like this in cohort 2, and Ariel makes fun of me all the time and calls it the football map because it makes absolutely no sense when you look at it. But as I'm drawing it, those connections make sense. All right, clearing, going once, going twice. Okay. So let's go look in our front end. And in our front end, we've got all of our books here. Okay. Now we want to make it so when we click on one of those books, we get the author and the year and all of that good stuff. So we come back to our code. And before I do, if you look, we have an and it says each child in a list should contain a unique key prop. What React is saying is whatever the top level thing that gets returned in a map wants a key added to it. And the key has to be unique. Fortunately, all of our books have an ID, and we know the ID is unique. So this key is what React uses for all of the magic under the hood. So if a book ever changes in the state, React doesn't have to re-render all of the books. It can just re-render the one book that just changed. So if we come over here and refresh, now our warning about key has gone away, because whenever we map, whatever the top level component is has to be returned. Okay, we're done with all of that. Now we want to link to a new page that has the details of the book. So I'm going to create a new file called book.js and do my const book, get my basic component going, return a div with an h1 book. I'm going to export my default book. Now I get to the fun part. I get to route to that. So I'm going to say, hey, I'm routing to a pass called /book/ and I'm including the ID. This ID is how the home page is going to tell the book page what book it's supposed to be showing. So I say element is equal to my book component that I just created. And apparently cannot type. Now I get an error, book is not imported, or we don't know what book is. So all we need to do is import our book from book. All we're doing is tying React to this book file over here. Now I'm on my homepage, clicking on it doesn't do anything. I've got to go tell my homepage, go send that over to the book file. So I import my link from React Router doc. And now I want my link to show up not around the entire LI, but the title within the LI. I can wrap almost anything in a link. So I'm going to say link to, and where do I want to link it to? I want to link to my /book/ my book.id. So the same place I'm getting book.title from the state that I'm mapping over, I'm also going to pull out the book ID. Now when I come over here and make sure my closing link tag is in the right spot, now I've got all of these links. So if I click on any one of these books, now I linked to book ID 2. React doesn't know anything about book ID 2, but it does know to put me on the book page because the router has the colon in front of ID, so it knows that is some parameter that is getting passed in. Now, the last step we need to do is rinse and repeat. We need to make an API call when the page first loads. So we're going to do a use effect. We're going to say const get book. And I'm going to call it book, not books, because I'm only getting one of them. And I'm going to get that book. That's an async function. I'm still going to get a response from the server. That's coming from a fetch. But now, when I do my localhost 3001 to get the book, I need to get the ID that's up in the parameters up here. I can't get that ID without a little help from use params from the router. Now I can get access to the parameters if I say use the params. So in here, my params now has my ID in it because I told the router right here, I'm passing in the ID. So I come here, I do all the normal work of getting the data out from the response.json. Then I need to get my book data to show up. Well, in order for it to show up down in my return, I know I need to set my book to my data.book. Well, in order to set book, I need to define what set book is. So I'm going to need state. But when this page first loads, it is going to not know what the book is, because this API call is going to finish, and when it's done, then the book data is going to show up down here. So what we do is we say, if you don't have the book loaded yet, return a div that just says loading. But when the API call runs and you're done getting the data and you set it into the state, then say, oh, the book is actually set, so we don't hit this loading, we come down here and we show the book information. So now we can use book however we want. We can say book.title, we can say by and say book.author, and we can say publish book. I think I called it year. And we can just throw a key tag around these. And we've got that showing up. And one final nice touch we can do, we can say link, make sure that we import link from React Router DOM, and we can make that go back to our home page, and we say go back to all books. So we click on that and we go back and we click Ready Player One. All that shows up. And if we go to the database and delete a row and refresh over here, it's gone. Comments, questions, concerns, feedback, brain fire levels.
My brain is mush, and I'm gonna have to rewatch this video again, but it's connecting.
Worthwhile to go back to the diagram. Let's just spend a minute on this. All those steps. Does this make more sense now?
It makes sense when you explain it.
It makes sense for me both ways. I think I just really have to pay attention to use effect, use state, and then the linking.
And I know it sounds dumb, but once you get it all working, go create a new folder and do it all over again. Right? Because getting comfortable with just this basic project is going to get you comfortable with the two most powerful hooks in React, which are use effect and use state.
Max, in that diagram, on the React side, would there be an orange line going from route component, the individual detail page, to book ID endpoint?
Yes. Is that the one you were talking about?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was going through the home somehow.
No, I could have done that with a filter, but I didn't. So the only thing that gets passed is the ID here. And then the ID is what goes back to the endpoint, and that's what pulls it through the whole chain.
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
Larry, go ahead.
Do we have time so I could show you my code just to see if you can see anything real quick or why? Yep. Nothing. All right.
Go for it.
All right. All right. So this was my code from yesterday. Got the DB set up. I did export the store and the database.
Yep.
It did connect successfully. Let me just do that real quick. NPM STRT. And so it establishes a connection, me on my front end, NPM ST. Got the split keyboard, I got used to it. ST.
You got caps lock on now.
Oh, thank you. ST. Oh, shit. NP.
I'm laughing only because I know the pain of a new keyboard, especially a split one.
I didn't like something there.
NPMI.
This this is from
Okay, now you should be able to NPM start or up arrow twice.
all right, so it went to a different screen. So let me share my other screen. But see how I have the
Yep.
The data.log. And if I go to my other screen, it's not nothing pops up in the console other than this web.
Because
text.
that's on the store page.
Okay.
So you would have to go to /store/1.
Okay. /store/1.
I'm guessing store the store ID is 1. Okay, go to your app.js. And switch your screen share for me or pull it over.
Okay. Let's see.
Okay, so you don't have the route set up for store yet.
Okay, so even though I just put the console log, it's not going to show up because I don't have a route to the store.
Correct. Yeah, that component is in space. So there's no, it doesn't know where to get the ID from, but it's not even going to do that because it's not connected in through app yet.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm feeling like you guys have brain fry. I'm feeling like you need a couple minutes to let all of that sink in. So I'm going to suggest that I move the rest of the questions, the interview prep stuff, all to when I get back, and we use the remaining 22 minutes of class for any questions for capstones.
If no one has a question for the capstone stuff, can we go over just a question or two or something for the interview stuff? Or would you prefer to just, okay.
Yeah, I'll give everyone 2 minutes to review code and capstone and see if you have any questions. If not, I'll go into my spiel about interview questions.
Okay.
Don't have enough time to do the ES6 review properly, but I can go through a couple interview questions.
Christy has her hand up though.
Christy, go for it. Thank you.
So after I had my one-on-one today, I went in and tried to do this, but I did too much. Like I had div class containers and all kinds of stuff instead of just basic stuff like you did. So I just fixed it because I had too much. But now I have an error and it's saying, I don't understand. It is saying that it failed to fetch. I'll just wait till tomorrow.
Oh, share your screen. Let's see if it's a quick one. I had home, but the home is gone. And it's saying. Okay, connection refused is your backend isn't running.
Oh, I didn't do npm run start. File change. Waiting for file changes before.
Module not found normally means you need npm I. Control C first.
I was gonna say Control C.
Okay, now npm run start. Okay, still an issue. So scroll up and see what module it says it doesn't have in the terminal. No, in the terminal, not in the console. Says no, too far. You did your npm I, then you did your npm start, and once it started, it says keep going down. Keep going down. It's starting it up, and then it's throwing an error, and it's saying cannot find module Avengers. So where do you require your Avengers file? Scroll up in server.js. You acquire Avengers through your DB. So go to your db.js. And here you require the Avengers file, and you say it's in the same folder as db.js. So go over here and let's see where Avengers actually is. Over here.
Well, you mean that folder? I mean that
file.
It's in the front end. It's not.
No, it's in the back end. But you called it Avenger.js, and in db.js it is called Avengers.
I didn't. I knew I needed to correct this. Oh my gosh. Because I had it wrong and everywhere. I've been going back and correcting that everywhere. Try it again.
Yep.
Control C.
Mm-hmm. Good to go.
Oh my God. So wait, refresh.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well now you got a different problem. Oh, my live share is still probably going. Let me close that. I think I jacked your port 3000. Okay, refresh again.
Oh God. I'm over it.
Sorry, so you've got some issue in browser router. You're going to have to work through that.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Nicole, go ahead.
Mine's is not on my capstone. It's on the previous homework.
It's fine.
Mommy.
Mommy. She always. Oh, I'm trying to pause this. Okay, so this is where I'm stuck at. I was trying to show you what it looks like. This is what it looks like. I want to fix the button. Can you help me fix the button? It just looks stupid, and it don't connect to nothing either.
Okay, show me where you have that code.
Right here.
Okay, so your two, we need to use ID for the link. So we're gonna say you're kind of on the right track. We won't be able to go to the shoe by the color, but so we're gonna just take that out for now. But where we want to link to needs to be one of your routes in here. So let me see. Okay, this is on your home page, but your home page is pulling in your shoes. So you need to separate that out. You need a separate page for one shoe to show up, and only one shoe. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a new file. called shoe.js, capital S, because whenever we make our own component, we use capitals. Okay, now what you need to do is set up, let me take over. Hold on. I'll do that for you.
Capital H and shoe.
Hold on, you can't click while I'm typing.
Okay. Can you mute me then?
Yep. Okay. So this is where the individual shoe is going to show up. So what's going to happen is when you click on one of these shoes, it's going to take you to the details page that's going to show you all the details about the shoe. So what we do is we need to get this into the router. So we go to our router in app.js and we say, hey, there's going to be a route that takes you to a shoe based off of the ID. And where it's taking you to is the shoe page. So in your shoes, which is in your home, we're going to link to a URL with /shoe/ the shoe ID. I close the link. What am I missing? Shoe ID, close the backtick. Close the LI, link. Parsing error 26, unexpected comma. What? 26.
I think you're missing an extra curly brace after shoe ID.
Oh,
maybe?
I am. Good catch.
Okay.
There you go. No, cannot resolve shoe because shoe shouldn't be in your home folder. It should just be in the source folder. Okay, so now when you go click on a shoe, it's going to take you to the right ID. So now what you need to do is all the work that I did on my book page to make the data show up on that in that particular shoe. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Larry, go ahead.
I got an error. We'll see if it's fixed now. Start. Of course, I went to a different page. And let me do my council. And option. Yeah, I don't. Can you see my other page now?
Yeah, I can see no routes match location. So you don't have a route in for whatever your home page is. Let me see your app.js.
Okay.
Okay, so you only have a route for your store page, which is fine. So let's go back to the browser and change your URL to /store/ and then whatever IDs in the database.
Yeah, I keep forgetting that part. I guess TRE and then 1. pure unadulterated genius. Thank you, Max.
Good work. So the only thing you're missing, Larry, is the like on the homepage listing out all the stores and making it so you can click on one store and get to the store detail page. That's the homework assignment. But if you're basing this off your capstone, you may not want that functionality. Christy, go ahead.
Yeah, that would help. So
I can't unmute you, but I can ask you to unmute.
Okay, so this again. So what I would like to do is, and I want to try to prep this before tomorrow. So what I want to try to do is I want to take.
What's tomorrow?
Hour one.
Oh, okay.
So I want to get rid of the header and the footer, and I want to just have a home page.
Okay.
So I want to get rid of all of that, but I would have to I broke it out. I broke out the header and put it in the header, and I broke out. And so I know
I mean, that's not a bad idea.
Right. And so my question is, I want to go back to my original idea. And so I want to have cards because I was on Oprah's website today. So I want to have cards, and I know what I want on my cards, so I understand what I need for my ERD. But what I want to do is, what I want to understand is, okay, so once I make it all just a home page, I can get rid of all these other pages, and then I would have a category. So on my card, one of the things that, so if I do a database, can I have how we just did, can I have things that show up on my card from the database? And so
but you're going to want two separate tables for that.
Well, that's what I was about to ask you. If I label it as categories, so if the things are in categories, if I have, say, 4 categories, is that something that I have to have separate tables, or can I still
well, it depends. Is every item in one category and only one category?
Right. Nothing overlaps. Nothing overlaps with
so then you just need 2 tables. You're going to need a category table that's going to have an ID and a name. And you're going to have 4 rows in that table for all 4 categories. And then you're going to add a new column in the items table that says category ID. And then we will go through a belongs to association, and I'll show you how to use an includes as part of one-on-one.
Okay, and what's my other question? So these are already in the home page, so I don't need to mess with these, right? The pictures, the images. And yeah, I think that's So yeah, that's what I want. So okay. I'm good with that.
We feeling better going into the weekend than we were feeling yesterday. We feeling a little bit more stable. Feeling like we're optimistic that we're going to get work done on our capstones and turn them in by Monday before class.
Yes.
For check-in, you don't need to stop working on them. Just want to get an idea of where you're at.
Oh, am I muted?
No, I'll catch it.
I got another question.
Yeah.
Header. So if I have a header and then I have the footer, I can still bring them over to the homepage and it will break it out on the homepage as header, footer. Jeez, this is a lot. My brain is fried.
The code base we work with at work is probably about 50,000 lines of code. You can't keep it all in your head. So you get really good at realizing that, hey, the only part I need to keep in my head is the part I'm working on.
Max, will this video be up tonight?
It will be.
Thank you.
The one thing I will say, I don't have, well, I'll use the last 5 minutes for some interview advice. I highly, highly, highly recommend that everyone take advantage of those mock interviews. I know I was joking earlier today about crying in the 30 minutes because no one signed up, but even if you have a job lined up after Careers in Code, you will have to interview again at some point in your life. The first interview you have is just going to go bad. So wouldn't you much rather have it go bad when the interview wasn't actually for a real position? So take advantage of all of the mock interviews that Laura is setting up for you guys, whether it's with me, whether it's with another company. Everyone who does our mock interviews is there to help you guys. The biggest advice that I have for interviewing is it's about telling a story, not answering a question. So you will oftentimes get a question about, tell me a time when, right? And I'm sure you had part of that in the CIC interviews as well. But the main goal is you do not want this to feel like an interrogation. You want this to feel like a conversation with the person. So you want to tell stories and you want to ask follow-up questions. You want to engage the person so they're not just running through a list of questions and you're just rattling off answers and you get to the end and they go, all right, did another interview. That's not the goal of an interview. A goal of an interview is to have a conversation filled with stories with your interviewer. Again, interrogation is not the way you want it to feel. You want to ask questions, you want to tell a story, and then you want to hook them in with some follow-up question. You want to know a little bit about them. You want to get some little nugget of information so that when you send your thank you email, you can put that in there so they'll remember which interview they just went through. Because chances are, if they're interviewing you for a real position, they're interviewing 30 other people. And by the time they get to number 30, they're not going to remember your specific interview. So getting that little piece of nugget of information, oh, I hope you have a great time at your kid's birthday party this weekend. Or, it was so interesting to find out that, you race cars on the weekend, or, whatever it is, you want to get into that conversation and have something that when you talk to that interviewer and you send the follow-up thank you email, you've got something to say. So, let me just add with that said, there are certain questions that you need to prepare for, and telling a story is a skill. It is an art. It is not something that you just go, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that, and you go out and you do it. So finding out how to tell or answer every question with a story to be engaging is important. Obviously, I would be a terrible teacher if I couldn't tell a story. When I'm teaching you guys code, I'm not reading off the line. I'm telling you a story of what the computer is doing and what we're trying to get the computer to do. That's the engagement, right? And that's what you want to bring into an interview. You don't want to just answer their question. You want to answer their question and I want you to experience what I was experiencing when I went through that. So there are questions that you can always prepare yourselves for. One of them is, where do you see yourselves in X number of years, whether it's 2 years or 5 years? You want to have an answer to that, because that's something that you should legitimately be spending some time thinking about, right? This isn't just, oh, I want to be working, or I want to be a developer, or really think about, where do you want to be in 2 years and 3 years and 5 years and 10 years? Because that is actually something that the interviewer can look at and say, hey, this person has ambition, or hey, this person understands what a career path looks like, or hey, this person has actually sat down and thought through not just the next step, but the next couple steps. Couple other questions you can prepare for. Tell me about a time when, right? They're really trying to set you up for storytelling, whether it's a time that you used problem solving, or a time that a customer was frustrated, or a time when, right, there's so many things that can come after that, but be prepared for that style of a question and know that you can take a minute. It's going to feel like an eternity to you, but when an interviewer asks you a question, stall. Say, that's a good question. Let me think about that for a minute, and actually come up with your story, formulate it, make sure you got the beginning, the middle, and the end, and then tell your story. Because an interviewer would much rather get a succinct story out of you than a long rambling one where they forgot what question they even asked you. So that's the art of the storytelling, is making sure that you're not rambling during the interview and you're keeping your stories still succinct. 2 other questions to prepare for. What are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? Hate the question. Every interviewer asks them. Make sure that you are prepared with a well-rehearsed answer for that one. And the last piece of advice I'll give on interview questions that are not specific to technical ones, prepare for a curveball. Prepare for a question that comes out of the blue that is meant to get you riled up. The interview question that we do for Careers in Code now is, tell me a time that you've shortened a feedback loop to get a product out the door faster. And people are like, what the hell is a feedback loop? And we see them pick it apart. Some other questions I've seen come out of the blue, things like, what's the last book you've read? What's the last movie you've watched? What kind of music do you like listening to? And you want to somehow connect that back into the job. And then the other curveballs that you can expect are, tell me how many barbers there are in New York City. How does that relate to the job at all? They don't actually care what number you come up with. They want to see your thought process. They want you to say, well, I would need to think about the population of New York City. How many people are in New York City? And then you go from there and you go, all right, well, if you get a haircut, how many people can a barber cut in one day? Okay, if we do the rough math and people get their haircut every, I don't know, couple weeks, that comes down to this number. You could get those curveball questions. Google used one, how many golf balls would fit in a 737? It is just to see your reasoning, and they don't really care what number you come up with. They care that they can see you explain how you think through something that you don't have the answer to off the top of your head. So all things to keep in the back of your head for prepping for interviews. There are a list of like the top 100 most used interview questions. Not a bad idea to read through them. Think through what your answer would be. Keep story in the back of your head. Keep conversation, not interrogation, in the back of your head. And after all of that, when I come back the following week, we'll go through some technical interview questions and get you guys prepared for those as well.
Quick question. How many mock interviews are required? Just one?
I don't know how many are required. I know you can do up to 4. I would encourage you to do at least 2. Any other questions for tonight, now that I've officially kept you 4 minutes over time?
Are all the mock interviews on that list, or will more be added?
More people will be signing up, but those time slots will be the only ones that we have.
Okay, thank you.
And if those time slots don't work for you, and you don't mind interviewing with me, go schedule a one-on-one instead of signing up on that spreadsheet, and I can do a mock interview at whatever time works in my calendar. Reminder to have cameras on for Nathan next week so that he can have that feedback from you guys. TAs will know about the cameras on rule, and you won't get credit for attendance unless your camera is on. If there are any problems with that, we can definitely do exceptions. So shoot me a message if you have a problem with that, and we can go from there. Homework this weekend is get your list project working that we worked on yesterday. You can use this video as a reference to get yours working. I will go create that Canvas assignment as soon as the video posts tonight.
All right. Thank you. Good
Thank
night,
you,
everybody.
Max.
Have an awesome
Good night, everybody.
next week, and I will see you not next Monday, but the following Monday.
Same
All
to you.
right.
Night, everyone.
Bye. Bye, y'all.
Bye.